Welcome to this ISNCT interview. Today we have the honor to have here with us Dr. Ian Swainson from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Conducting the interview with me is Agustina Portu, Chief of our ISNCT Communication Task Force. So thank you, Ian, for your availability. I would like to start by asking you, could you explain the role of the physics section at the IAEA for the general public?
Sure. So thank you for inviting me today. So the physics section is one part of the division of physical sciences, physical and chemical sciences. So we deal with research applications of radiation technologies and nuclear technologies as well. And our neighboring sections are divided into other activities that are nearby. So we work very closely with a group that does industrial applications. So things like cyclotron radiopharmacies or irradiation of food, for instance, and the nuclear data section, which provides data for, well, principally reactors, but also for BNCT, of course, requires the good quality nuclear data, and the groundwater hydrology section. And then we fit more broadly into a department of nuclear applications, and they include things like animal diseases. We work with the Food and Agriculture Organization and human health, so like oncology, radiobiology, things like that.
My second question is, how did your career at the IAEA start, and which is your role and responsibilities?
So I had some rather minor interaction with the IEA before I started, but in truth, I just applied for a job. That's how it started. I started in 2015 with that. Prior to that, my nuclear, if you like, background, I was in neutron scattering, mostly at a research reactor. So I had worked on some projects to do with nuclear fuels as well. I worked at spallation source with neutron scattering, some synchrotron work. And then before I came, I was involved in working for a university to put together two major proposals. One was for a nuclear studies institute with 7 years of funding. And the second was to build the first cyclotron radiopharmacy in the province. And then I stayed on that capital project on design, licensing, and project oversight. So currently my job title is nuclear physicist. And within our department, we run various activities. So as you know already, we run meetings. I would say really everybody's role is some kind of project manager. So you have to organize and manage events and projects. We plan typically 2 to 3 years ahead to get the activities approved and the budget in place. So we organize technical meetings such as the one on BNCT. So we have to organize the venue and the agenda, budget, and all of these things to make sure the announcements are out. And then finally that the documents are published at the end of the event. We run things called coordinated research projects that the IEA has a framework for. So they would be things in our remit of broadly nuclear physics research applications. And those are 4-year projects, typically with 12 to 16 different member states involved. So we run and manage those. And then there are things that are a little bit outside of our immediate department. So we run in a kind of a matrix organization. So there is the Department of Technical Cooperation, which runs, I would say, technical assistance projects to many developing countries. And we're brought in as the technical people to help find experts to go and assist, or training opportunities for people overseas, or buying equipment. That's brand new to me. I'd never done that before. I bought a lot of equipment since I've been here. It was a completely new activity. And then finally, some of us volunteer on the Incident Emergency Center, which is a emergency response for nuclear and radiological emergencies. And my role there is team leader. So in the event there is a nuclear emergency around the world, the IEA handles the assessment for the world, if you like. So we have an assessment team that gets information from the country, and we put out a prognosis statement and statement of fact as the situation evolves. So those are my main roles in my job.
So Ian, it's really impressive. You mentioned a huge amount of management activities. But in relation to BNCT, could you summarize the relation between IAEA and BNCT in terms of those meetings, technical documents, and so on?
Sure. So we worked a little bit with the International Society, but the relationship has been mostly informal so far. I think, in fact, the society itself is still being registered as a formal organization most recently. So we gave some assistance through something called a cooperation agreement to the meeting last year. And in normal times, when it's a physical meeting, we give a small grant of a few €1,000s to assist people to attend. Really, I think the main role between us and the International Society has been through its members. I mean, they attended and helped distribute the announcement of the meeting to all of its members. So we've had strong interaction with many of the key people within the society. And we also work with individual institutions. So we have a strong link with Japan, and in particular, Okayama University at the moment.
And which is the purpose of publishing a TECDOC? How is this project managed?
So again, usually you have to think 2 to 3 years ahead, because you have to have these activities in place. So we would plan the meetings that far ahead. Because we're never the in-depth, or rarely the in-depth expert on the topics that we're going to have the meetings on. Typically, we have a small preparatory meeting called a consultancy meeting. Normally, it's sort of the order of 5 people for a few days. We would ask people we've identified from around the world to come here, and they would flesh out the scope of the main meeting and also identify experts. And then maybe typically something like 9 months later, we would hold a technical meeting. So that's open to basically anybody with an interest that can be nominated by their country to attend. And that's where we run the main meeting, where we have presentations, discussion, and after that meeting, the TECDOC is written. So it's written in the background, typically anyway, up to about a year or more after the meeting takes place. And then finally, when we feel it's in a good state, it would go for internal review and finalization and publication.
So in relation to this TECDOC, could you briefly describe this new IAEA BNCT TECDOC and which is the current status?
Sure. So as you probably know, there was a TECDOC published in 2001, TECDOC 1223. And that's been a major reference for BNCT people around the world since its inception. But it's now 20 years old, and many things have changed. So there's been changes. As you know, BNCT is a very broad field, so been changes in many areas, like dose calculation, pharmacology, yeah, many different areas. But probably the biggest change has been the neutron sources themselves. So back in 2001, if you look at that TECDOC, all of the neutron sources were research reactors. And there was about 2 or 3 sentences saying accelerators could be good in the future. And since then, as you may well be aware, the number of research reactors around the world is in general declining, especially the smaller ones. So they're being closed and not replaced. And so almost all of the neutron sources that were involved in BNCT at the time of drafting of that report are closed or no longer involved. But in the meantime, they've around the world, this new technology, if you like, comes under a broad umbrella term called compact accelerator-based neutron sources, which covers many different types of accelerators, but they're basically relatively low energy, relatively easy to construct neutron sources. They've come into play. And in 2020, really the key step was that Japan licensed a compact accelerator-based neutron source based around a cyclotron, and then the dose engine, the patient positioning system, and the pharmaceutical for routine clinical application of BNCT. And that's made a huge difference, because now you can place the neutron source at the hospital if you wish. An accelerator, a reactor that's almost impossible to do, In most countries, you can't register a neutron beam from a reactor as a medical device, whereas you can do that for accelerators. They have, of course, LINACs for cancer treatment, cyclotrons for radiopharmaceutical production. They're very familiar with these in hospitals. This is just another logical step to being in a clinical environment. And it means that for the first time, BNCT has the opportunity to become a more routine clinical application. So because of this, there's big interest again in the development of this around the world. So we knew we had to revamp the guidance because there was almost no discussion of accelerators. So that was one of the impetuses, but also to bring up the developments in the field since 2001. We actually had 2 technical meetings. So we had one back in July 2020. And as I said, normally we write the draft after that, which we did in the background for almost 18 months. And we tried to be very inclusive. So something that changed compared to our normal operation was COVID, and everything went online. So although both meetings had more than 100 people in the event, only 2 people ever physically came here. But it's been advantageous in that we know that the previous TECDOC was very much a community reference. And now we have, the community had big involvement because many people came from around the world. I mean, from Argentina, like Agustina, I don't know how many people, maybe of the order of 20 people came. That would have been impossible to do. So we've used the second technical meeting as a community review of the draft. So that second meeting happened back in March this year. I'm still following up with some of the minor corrections, but I would say at the moment it's like 97% done. So I'm hoping to finish the final corrections by 2 to 3 weeks. And then we would begin the internal process of internal review. We have to respond to those requests for changes and then publication. So that's where we are at the moment and how we got there.
I have a last question for you. What is your advice for young people who start to work on BNCT?
So as you know, BNCT is a really broad field, so you can be involved in BNCT from many ways, right? So you've got accelerated physics people, pharmacology, pharmacists, analytical chemists and physicists, and medical physics, oncology, so on, radiobiologists. So I would advise first that you just have a good foundation in whatever your subject is, because BNCT is still quite a niche area to begin with. So you want to have a good technical background in whatever your specialty is. And if you want to get involved in BNCT, there's still relatively few groups around the world, is to try and find a supervisor or a group that you can work with experience in that area where possible. You could join the International Society or your National Society for Capture Therapy, go to their meetings. And when this TECDOC is published, then of course it's freely downloadable, as are all TECDOCs, so you can read that as well.